We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Bezim and Bezim Meseches Gittin. This is Gittin Daf 42b. On the previous summit, the Gemara had a statement from an Amora. Let's say you have an individual who's half Eved and half free. He works one day for himself and one day he works for his master, and he gets gored by an axe, he gets damaged. So the halach is, it depends on what day he gets gored. If he gets gored on a day that he's working for the master, so then the money, the compensation, goes to the master. And if it's on a day when he's working for himself, so then the compensation goes to himself. And the Gemara now is in the middle of asking from a brisa. The brisa is talking about a case, a similar situation where you have an Eved who's, again, half Eved, half free. And this time, in this case, it's not that he gets damaged by an ox, but he gets killed by an ox. Now, by a regular Eved, if you have a situation where an Eved gets killed by an ox, so the halach is that there's a payment of shloshim shekel, there's a payment of a knas of 30 shekel. And the halacha, let's say the person's a free man, he gets killed by an ox, so then there's a halacha of kofar. The kofar payment is made to the yarshim, to those who inherit the individual who was killed. And here the Bryce is saying, if you have a situation of a person who's half free and half Eved, so half of the knas, meaning 15 shekel, that gets paid. The chatzi kofar liyarshim, and then you do a half a kofar to those who inherit him, because again, this is a situation of a half Eved, half free man. And so the Gemara now asks, Amai, so why is that the halacha? Hachanami here also, Lema Yom Shal Rabu L'Rabu, Yom Shal Atzma L'Atzma. We should say the same thing as the statement of the Amora on the previous summit, that it depends what day he was killed on. If it was a day that he was working for his master, then the entire thing should be paid to the master, meaning the whole fine. And if it was a day he was working for himself, so then it should be the full payment of kofar. That should go to those who inherit. And Rashi over here says, V'chatzi kofar d'tzad cheirus, again, the half kofar payment because he's half free, liyarshav to those who inherit him, will kamon parach. Now later on the Gemara will ask, yarshin minole, so where is it, how is it that he has any yarshim? Who's inheriting this individual? The whole point is he's a half Eved, half free person. He can't be with a shivcha, he can't be with a regular Jewish woman, so how does he have these children? But in any case, that's the question of the Gemara. Why is it over here that we divide the payment in half instead of saying that it goes by the day, whether he's working for himself or working for his master? And the Gemara answers, Shani Hach, it's different here in this case where the Eved is killed by the shore to Kakalia Karna, because here the principle is completely destroyed, meaning the Eved is totally killed. It's not just a damage that's going to be healed. It's a situation where the Eved was actually killed. That's a permanent damage, so to speak. It doesn't matter what day it is. Going forward, he's not going to be around at all, and therefore you split the payments, and you say the payment is going to be half kofar and half of the knas. But the Gemara says, but how could you come up with a case, meaning the case earlier was where he was just damaged, but apparently that's a case where the principle is not destroyed. What would be a case where the principle is not destroyed? For example, let's say there was an injury to his hand. Vitsamsa yado, Rashi says, Vitsamsa means yavsha, his hand dried out, meaning there was damage to his hand. He couldn't do anything with his hand. However, however, in the end, it will heal. So that's a case where apparently we're calling that lo kakalya karna, because it eventually will heal. As Rashi says, v'sofa lachzor v'shayminole. So now we evaluate kama dama pechusim bekach limocher achsha b'shuk. There's got to be a nezek damage. Now, if a human damages, so the halach is you pay the 5 payments, nezek tzar, ripoy, sheves, and boshes. But if you have a situation of damage made by an animal, there's only the payment of nezek. What's the payment of nezek? How much did this individual go down by in terms of if he were to be sold in the marketplace as a slave? So you have to evaluate how much did he go down. V'im yom shel rabu hayinasen hakol rabu. If it's the days working for his master, the entire payment will go to the master. V'im yom shel atzmo hakol atzmo. If it's a day's working for himself, then the entire payment goes to himself. That would apparently be the case. But there's a problem if that's the case. Hanicholi Abaya. That case can work out according to Abaya. Abaya says in a situation of a person damaging in such a way, you would have 2 kinds of sheves. One is called sheves gedola. One is called sheves katana. Sheves gedola essentially is nezek. The point is it works out according to Abaya because there's a payment of nezek in this kind of a case. Meaning if a person's hand is damaged and eventually it will heal, there is a payment of nezek. So an animal also, if an animal does the damage, there's also a payment of nezek in that situation. But according to Rava, Rava says, let's say a human would inflict this kind of damage, where you have a hand that's injured that it will eventually heal. There is no nezek payment in that case. All you make is the sheves payment, meaning all you make is the payment that this person is not able to work. So in that situation, hai shorhu. Here, the statement of the Amor was talking about the damage is inflicted by an ox. The shore ain't no mashalim ela nezek, but a shore only pays nezek a shore doesn't pay sheves. Meaning to say, if the case is that the hand is injured and it's going to be healed, according to Rava, if an animal were to inflict that kind of damage, there actually is no payment, because that's not a nezik situation, that's a sheves situation. That's a situation where the individual is not able to work temporarily because of the damage, and the shore wouldn't pay that at all, so it wouldn't make any sense to say that was the statement on the previous Amud. Rashi says, again, no sin lo sheves gedola v'sheves ketana. According to Abaye, there is a nezik payment, which we refer to as sheves gedola, and Rashi explains, sheves gedola, hein p'chaz damav limocher achshav b'shuk. Sheves gedola essentially means how much lower in value is this individual if he'd be sold in the marketplace, v'hu nezik. That really is nezik. So there is a nezik payment in this case. Ulahachi karile sheves. The reason why they're referring to it as sheves, meaning sheves gedola, shepchaz damav shel achshav, because the lowering of the value right now, Eino ela mishum sheves. That's only because of the fact that he can't work. Why is he going to be cheaper in the marketplace? Because he can't do the work. Sheino roy lasos malacha b'shtei yadav. He can't do work right now with two hands. Adzman shetachzor yadav, until his hand heals. Ela lishmor kishuim yehei roy. The only thing he can really do is to be like a guard over the vegetables. Lachar sheyekel mimenu keiv hamak iktzas. Meaning he's going to be in the hospital a little bit. When that goes away and he's able to do, he'll be able to do some small work to be a guard over the produce. V'sheves ketana. Now, what's sheves ketana? Hainu ki'ilu hu shomer kishuin shenosin lo kol yemei cholyav sheyishka b'mita. So that means, let's say, while he was sick in bed, so he could have, instead of being sick in bed, he could have just been doing this very simple job of guarding the produce. Machmas choli zeh she'enu yachal lishmor kishuim. Now he can't. So in other words, sheves ketana is while he's in the hospital, so then he can't do any work. You pay him because he could have been doing some work if he wouldn't have been injured in this way. He could have been doing work that pays very little, like being a shomer kishuim. That's the sheves ketana. And the sheves gedola, that refers to the fact that he can't do his work. If he's sold in the marketplace, he's going to be sold for cheaper because he can't do real work that you can do with two hands. That's essentially the nezik payment. So shaper, so that it makes sense to cave the shayach din nezik v'makazu, since there's a concept of nezik, of damages with this kind of a wound, mechayev shor Allah. So a shor makes that kind of damage. The shor, there is an obligation to pay that nezik. V'kevin de lokalia karna lagamri yom shel rabbo l'rabbo yom shel asman li'asman. Since this is a damage that's not permanent, it's not forever. So again, we'll split it up in this fashion. If it's the master's day, it goes to the master. If it's his day, it goes to him. But Rashi continues, Shivto shall kol yom v'yom, according to Rava's approach, where the only thing that's paid is sheves. V'ein kan pchas dam, you don't pay for damage in terms of how much he'd be sold in the marketplace. However, sofol achzer, because eventually it's going to heal. El lefi sheves shall kol yom yitin lo, kol yimei nefilasa lemita yitin schar adam shalem. The whole day, let's say that he's in the hospital, so all those days you give him the value of payment of wages that he would have made had he had two hands. You give him the full wages. You give it according to the work that he was accustomed to doing. And let's say he gets better, he's not in the hospital anymore, but he's only able to do small work like guarding produce. So then he'll watch the produce, and then you'll give him the difference. What is the difference between that amount of wages and the wages he could really do if he had two hands? But it's always a sheves payment. So again, Haishoru here in this case, the statement of the Amora was talking about damage inflicted by an ox. Meaning to say, the Gemara means that since if a person would inflict this kind of damage, he wouldn't pay nezek at all, it would only be a sheves payment. Shor pater legamri, so the shor is totally pater. The hey devarim gabe adam ksiv, because the 5 payments are only when a man inflicts the damage. V'lo gabe shor, that doesn't apply by an ox. The ksiv ish kitein mum ba'amiso v'lo shor ba'amiso. It talks about ish, it talks about a man inflicting the damage, and not a shor, not an ox. And the Gemara answers, if you want, I could say that statement of the Amora on the previous Amud, it's actually not talking about a shor doing the damage. It is talking about an Adam. It's talking about a man that's doing the damage. And Rashi says, that statement we said earlier, Yom shel rabbo l'rabbo, that on the day he's working for his master, the payment goes to the master. Kishiko Adam, it's not talking about when a shor damages him. It's actually talking about when a man damages him. If you want, I could also say Memri, that's just a statement from an Amora. Memra l'rava lo svirale. Rava doesn't hold of that statement of the Amora. In other words, Rava, who says that there's only a sheves payment in this case, actually cannot be reconciled with that statement of the Amora. Rashi says, really the damage was inflicted by an ox in that statement of the Amora. And it follows Abaya Damar Shaykh Badin Nezek, who says that in such a case, so that there's a payment of Nezek that's relevant. And the fact that you find a difficulty with this statement of the Amora to Rava, it's just a statement statement of an Amora. Ve'ena lo Mishnah v'lo Brisa. It's not a Mishnah or a Brisa. Umeimra Rava Amar Lach Meimra lo Svirle. Rava doesn't hold of this statement of the Amora. And the Gemara continues. Iboilu. They had the following question: Mu'ukav get shichur. Let's say you have an Eved who's no longer working for his master, but he's still waiting to receive a document that will set him free. Yesh lo knas o ein lo knas. Is there a knas in that situation? Let's say the Eved is killed by a shore, so the payment of 30 shekel that goes to the master, is that paid in this situation or not? Kesav shloshim shkolim yitein la'adonav amar achmana. Pasuk says you got to give 30 shekel to the master. V'hailav adonu. And in terms of money, monetarily, this is not a master. He no longer works for this master. Odilmor maybe even the mechusar get shichur, since he's still waiting to receive that document which will completely set him free. Adon karina bey, that's still called his master. And the Gemara says, Tashma, coming here a proof from what we brought above. Hey, mismisha chetzi Eved v'chetzi ben chorin. Again, let's say the shore kills this individual who's half Eved, half free. Nosen chatzi knas l'rabo v'chatzi kofer liyarshav. Half the knas payment is given to the master, and half the kofer payment is given to those who inherit him. And the Gemara says, my lav is it not? Commishnah Achrona. It's following the Mishnah Achrona, meaning that according to the Mishnah Achrona, someone who's half Eved, half Ben Chorin, we're going to force the master to give a document to free him. And in terms of money, monetarily right now, he's not a slave. He's not actually working for the master. It's exactly like our case. And we see that there is a knas in this situation. And the Gemara says, lo, no, Commishnah Rishona. This Bryce over here is following the original version of the Mishnah, where we say that in the case of a Chatzi Eved, Chatzi Ben Chorin, he actually works one day for himself, one day for the master, and that's the situation over here. So we're not talking about an Eved that is not working for the master. On the contrary, every other day he's working for the master, and that's why there is a payment. And Rashi explains, Mu'ukav get shichur, all he's missing is this get shichur, mechusar get shichur. Again, he's missing the get shichur. Kol hanachta amrinan buhu de yotzel lecheres. That means all these cases where we say the Eved goes free, vein l'rabo aleim elish etzrichen get shichur, and there's nothing else, it doesn't work for the master at all, except he's just waiting for the document from the master. Kigon makdish umafke, for example, somebody who sanctifies his Eved, who makes his Eved ownerless, umishachatzi ben chorin, or if you have this case of half free, the tanam kofen esrabo, where we force the master to give the document. So in that case, yesh lo knas. Is there a payment of knas? Shloshim kesef l'rabo im nachol shor. If he's gored and killed by an axe, is there the payment of 30 shekel to his master? And Rashi continues, my lav Mishnah Achrona. Isn't this brisa following the Mishnah Achrona, meaning la'achar shechazru Beis Hillel lahoros, after Beis Hillel changed their ruling, and instead they ruled the kofen esrabo, that we forced the master to set the Eved free. Ve'afilu hachi shakel knas, and apparently there's still a knas payment, the tzad avdus of the portion of Avdus, the fact that he's a half Eved, calls manshlo nichtav agedi, as long as the document has not been written. And the Gemara ends up saying, no, it's not like the Mishnah Achrona, but it's like the Mishnah Rishona. Commissioner Rishona, the less like kofen, according to the Mishnah Rishona, we don't force the master to free the Eved in that case. Adon Gomer, who he's completely considered his master, and he just works every other day for that Adon. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, another proof. The Brisa says, Hipel es shino, if he knocks out the tooth of his Eved, Vesima es eno, and then he blinds him, Yotze b'shino, so then as the Pasuk says, the Eved goes free because his tooth was knocked out, Venosin d'meino, and then the Eved receives the payment of the value of his eye. Now this case also, the Gemara is assuming is the same situation. In terms of money, monetarily, he's no longer owned by the Adon, but he still is waiting for a document, and yet he's receiving payment for his eye. And so the Gemara says, "V'yamid yesh lo knas, or knas l'rabo." If you're going to say that an Eved in such a situation, there is a fine that is paid if he's killed, let's say, by a shore, and that payment, that fine of 30 shekel, goes to the master. Hashtachavli be'achrini yahavle l'rabe. So here in this situation, if he's wounded by others, the payment goes to the master. Chavle be'rabe gufa yoiv le'lidei. But the master himself, he's the one that wounds the Eved. He blinds him, damages his eye, and he pays the Eved. That doesn't make sense. If the master is making a payment to the Eved in this case, where the Eved is still waiting for a document, so then certainly there's not going to be a fine payment that's given to the master in this case. And the Gemara says, no, Dilma Kamandamar Eino Tzarech. Maybe this brisa follows the one who says that when the tooth is knocked out, there is no requirement for a document. The Tanyas we learned in a brisa, Bekulan Eved Yotze B'hen Lecheres. In all of these cases, the Eved goes free. V'tzarech get shichra me rabo, and he requires a get. He requires a document that sets him free from his master. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Meir Meir Omer Eino Tzarech. Rabbi Meir says that's not necessary. Once, let's say, the tooth is knocked out, he goes free. There's no need for a document. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Tzarech. Rabbi Eliezer says a document is needed. Rabbi Tarfon Omer Eino Tzarech. Rabbi Tarfon says the document is not needed. Rabbi Akiva Omer Tzarech. Rabbi Akiva says the document is needed. Again, you see a machlokas tanoim. And the Brisa continues, Hamachriin Lefnei Chachamim, those who try to find the middle ground among the sages, Omrim, they say as follows, they say the following compromise. Nirim Divrei Rabbi Tarfon B'Shein V'ayin, Hol V'Torah Zichsalo. It seems that Rabbi Tarfon is correct that a document is not needed if the Eved is going free because of his tooth or because of his eye, because that's explicit in the Torah. V'Divrei Rabbi Akiva B'Sharei Varim, but the words of Rabbi Akiva, that seems correct if the Eved is going free on account of other limbs, Ho'alu Knas Chachamimu, since that's just learned as a fine from the Chachamim, so there a document would be required. The Gemara says, Knas, why are we calling it a fine? Hakroi Kardashinan, it's a drasha of the psukim, it's not a fine. Elaim, or rather say that's what we mean to say. Ho'alu Medrash Chachamimu, since the other limbs, the fact that an Eved goes free on account of losing the other limbs is a Medrash of the Chachamim, so there already a document would be needed. And the Gemara continues, Iboilu, they had the following question, Mu'ukav get shikhr, let's say you have this Eved again who's not working for his master, but he doesn't have the document to set him free. Ochel betruma, eino ochel. Does he eat truma? Let's say his master is a Kohen, or does he not eat truma? Kinyan kaspo, amar achmana v'hailav kinyan kaspo. On the one hand, we could say he has to be owned monetarily, and in this case, he's not owned monetarily, and therefore he doesn't get truma. Odilmor maybe kaven the mechusar get shikhr, since he still hasn't received the get shikhr. Kinyan kaspo, karina be, he is called kinyan kaspo, and therefore he would be able to eat truma. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come in here the following proof. The Omer of Mesharshia, because Rav Mesharshia said, Kohenes shenesare valda bevlad shivchos. If you have a Kohenes and her child gets mixed up with the child of her shivcha, so meaning you have two children over here, one is a Kohen and one is the Eved of a Kohen, and we don't know which one is which. Harei elu ochlim b'truma. The halach is they both can eat truma, because an Eved of a Kohen can eat truma and a Kohen can eat truma. V'chol can chelik echad al agor. When they go to the threshing floor to get the truma, they have to go together. The halach is in general an Eved doesn't go alone to the threshing floor to get truma, so therefore they go together to get the truma from the threshing floor. Hegedilu hataruvas meshachron zeh, and when they get older, so then these two mixed up children, they can free one another. One of them is the owner, one of them is the slave. We don't know which one is which, so they will free one another. Now in this case over here, whoever is the Eved is not working for the other one because they're all mixed up. So it's the same kind of case where monetarily the Eved is not actually working for the Adon, and we see that the Eved is allowed to eat truma. But the Gemara says, Hachi Ashta, what kind of proof is this? Hasam over there, and Miyavo Eliyahu, if Eliyahu would come, V'yomer Bechad Minayu de Evedu, and would be able to identify and say which one of them is the Eved, so Kinyan Kaspo Karina Base, certainly that Eved would be Kinyan Kaspo, and that's why he can eat Truma. Hacha, but over here, in a case where the person has no monetary ownership over the Eved doesn't work for the Adon, so Lav Kinyan Kaspo Huklal. That's not Kinyan Kaspo at all. And the Gemara continues, Iboilu, they had the following question, Eved Shemechoro Rabo Leknas. Let's say an Eved is sold by his master, but only for the Knas payment, meaning the master sold to the Lokeach and said, if this Eved should ever get gored and killed by an ox and there's a payment of 30 shekel, that payment won't go to me. I'm selling you the rights to that payment. You will receive the 30 shekel. Machar o eno machar. Is that considered a good sale or not? And the Gemara says, Tiboiler Rabbi Meir, Tiboiler Rabbanan. This is a question whether we follow Rabbi Meir or the Rabbanan, and the Gemara explains. Tiboiler Rabbi Meir, it's a question according to Rabbi Meir. Arkan lo kam Rabbi Meir adam makne davar shelo boliolam elikagon peros dekel. Rabbi Meir only says a person is able to give over something that doesn't yet exist. That would be true, let's say, by the fruits of a palm tree. The avidi dasu, because in general we know those fruits will come. In the future they are certainly going to come, and so therefore a person can sell those items. But over here, if you're selling the knas payment, mi yemer demingach, who says it's ever going to materialize? Who says this Eved will ever be gored? V'im tim salomer demingach, and even if you say he's gored, mimai de mishalim, who says the owner of the axe is going to pay the fine? There are ways of getting out of paying a knas. Let's say a person admits, for example, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph.